Let's talk for a few minutes about World Wide Web security using a conventional browser and the kinds of conventional connections that people often make. I'm using Mozilla Firefox here, but the principles that are involved will be the same, whether I'm using Firefox or Microsoft's Internet Explorer or some other browser. You may notice that I've connected to Google.com, and I'm using a regular connection. I typed in http://www.google.com, and I want to ponder for a minute, what does that really mean? It obviously brought up this Google search page. Google's search sign-on page is rather unique today, but this is Google. Now, obviously, in the real world, when talking about security, we might be more likely to use a banking or e-commerce site, for our example, but here, I'm just going to use Google, and I hope you'll visualize this as if it were your bank. And when I typed in that address in the address bar, what it really means is that I'm requesting an unsecure hypertext transfer protocol connection with whatever computer or service is assigned and associated this domain name. And that's brought up Google.com. Now, as an alternative to this, if I wanted to connect securely, that is, if I wanted to have an encrypted connection that people couldn't monitor, I'd stick an S right here. By putting an S in the address bar, I'm saying I want a secure hypertext transfer protocol, or an encrypted connection that people out on the internet couldn't intercept and read, connecting with the service or computer that's been assigned this domain name. So I'm saying I want an encrypted connection to somebody, and the person or machine with whom I connect should be the owner of this domain. And when I encrypt the information, I want to use a cryptographic key that only the owner of that domain can use to read it. Now, when I press enter, that should happen. It says it's waiting for and now has got that connection. Now it says I've requested an HTTPS secure connection with whatever entity owns the domain that's named encrypted.google.com, and down here this padlock icon means that I've got that. What this padlock really means is that I've got an encrypted connection to somebody, and the entity to whom I've got the connection has absolutely convinced people or organizations that my browser trusts that he is the owner of this domain, encrypted.google.com. Now, to find out who that person really is, we need to dig a little bit deeper. At this point, all I know is I've got an encrypted connection to somebody, and that person or entity has convinced people that my browser trusts that he is the owner of this domain, encrypted.google.com. Because it's encrypted, interlopers between me and them on the internet can't see or decrypt the data that's been transferred to them. This would look just like gobbledygook, but because this entity has presented to me a certificate containing his cryptographic key, and because he's convinced my browser and people or organizations that my browser trusts that he is indeed the owner of that certificate and key, my browser is able to use that key to decrypt this data. As it turns out, the system works pretty well, and the encryption is very strong, but there is a weakest link in the chain, and it has to do with people fooling you into using their key instead of the proper key. So you end up having an encrypting connection with them instead of the person you think you've got. If they're a bad guy, you could have a serious problem. Let's take a closer look at this little icon right here, that padlock icon. If I double-click on it, I'll see more details about the certificate and the entity that owns this domain with its associated connection and keys. Click, click. This frame then gives information about the connection and the certificate associated with encrypted.google.com. I got several little tabs here that I could look at to see what we're dealing with here, and I'm going to concentrate on this security tab for now. It says website identity. The website is named encrypted.google.com, and it doesn't supply any information about the people that are the owners of that domain. Now, that's not too disturbing. A lot of websites do that. Sometimes the owners want to remain private and keep their own private lives private. It says that the certificate has been verified by Google Incorporated. Now, that's not that commonplace because I'm connected to Google and its identity is verified by Google. That can only be done by a few entities that are known as certificate authorities. So Google evidently has won the trust of other organizations and said, we want to be a certificate authority, and they're asserting themselves and saying, yeah, it's us, and we prove it by signing ourselves. This situation is known as a self-signed key, or a self-signed certificate. It's as if your best friend was saying to you, trust me, it's me. You can use the keys in this certificate to exchange private information with me, and only you and I will be able to read them. You might want to verify this with some external source if you're not really talking to somebody you trust, if it's not really your best friend. To do that, we want to click on the View Certificate icon. Click. And now I'm seeing the certificate, which is a digital document arranged according to conventions that have been established and agreed upon by people that everybody trusts, and that arrangement includes details about the certificate and the organization that owns it. For example, some of the same information we've already seen before. I'm going to go to the Details tab and take a look at the certificate hierarchy. This says the certificate belongs to Google.com, and it was signed by the Google Internet Authority. So Google signed their own certificate here. This is a self-signed certificate, originally obtained from Equifax. Now, by gentleman's agreement among the producers of browsers and operating systems, Google is considered to be a trusted company because they enjoy a very good reputation. The same is true for Equifax. That is how we can have a high degree of confidence that this certificate is good. And then inside the certificate, we've got the public key of Google. This data right down here at the bottom, all this stuff are the bits and bytes constituting the public key that my browser used to decrypt this screen. This allows me to read the screen using the proper public key for these guys. Okay, that is what this icon really means. Now, I want you to think about that for a few minutes. Remember, a moment ago we talked about a gentleman's agreement by which Google.com was well respected and trusted by everybody that makes browsers and operating systems? Well, as it turns out, there are a lot of organizations that are trusted by everybody that makes browsers and operating systems. And if any one of those organizations can be bribed or subverted or impersonated or penetrated, your browser will trust the certificates that they sign and will encourage you to use the keys that result. So, it's very important that we understand how this works and how your browser will alert you if there's any kind of an unusual situation with regard to the trust and the signatures used when we make a connection. Now, there can be some problems with that. Let's talk about a different site where we might have a different view of things. I like my own site for this. I'm going to go to my own AskMisterWizard.com http://AskMisterWizard.com website. And here's our little website, our little online magazine, AskMisterWizard.com. Now, if I want to have a secure connection, notice this is an unsecure connection. It just says HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Notice there's no S there, and there's no padlock down here. This is an open, unsecure connection, and interlopers on the internet between me and the website could see that traffic. Suppose I want to have a secure connection. I can insert an S right here saying I'm now requesting a secure Hypertext Transfer Protocol connection to whichever machine or service responds to this domain name, AskMisterWizard.com. I want a secure connection to the owner of a certificate for that domain. When I hit enter, we'll try to get that. But I get an error message that says secure connection failed. Further details indicate that AskMisterWizard.com uses an invalid security certificate. The certificate is valid only for the following names: powweb.com. Now, this kind of a warning about the certificate being invalid or issued to the wrong organization is the only kind of warning upon which you can rely from a modern browser using modern cryptographic techniques to warn you if you may be going to an invalid site or an imposter site. When you see a warning like this, you should immediately become suspicious and ask yourself, is there some good reason why this certificate is not following the usual arrangement or is not attributed to the proper organization? And if you don't know or can't find some good reason for this discrepancy, you should get out of there and not go to that site. On the other hand, if you know some good reason why you should trust this site in spite of the discrepancy, then it's okay to add an exception. You might know more about this site than the people that signed the certificate. So you can add an exception to your usual policy for this site. Continuing now with a discussion of the text in the warning message, it says, this could be a problem with the server's configuration, or it could be someone trying to impersonate the server. If you've connected to the server successfully in the past, the error may be temporary and you can try again later, or you could add an exception. Well, with FireSox, the way you can learn more, and I'll do this now, is to begin adding an exception, and I'm going to do that to show you what happens. I'm clicking on Add an Exception. I get a warning that says, you should not add an exception if you are using an internet connection that you do not trust completely if you are not used to seeing a warning for this server. So you have the options of Get Me Out of Here or Add an Exception. Again, for purposes of illustration, I'm going to click on Add an Exception because I know there are more chances to learn what's going on here, so I'm clicking Add Exception. Click. Now it says, you're about to override how Firefox identifies this site. Legitimate banks, stores, and other public sites will not ask you to do this. So, ordinarily, you would not add an exception. And before I add an exception, I'm going to take a look at the certificate. Again, just getting more information so we can talk about what's going on here. Get certificate. It says, this certificate or this site attempts to identify itself with invalid information. It's the wrong site. The certificate belongs to a different site which could indicate an identity theft. Now, we at AskMisterWizard haven't stolen anybody's identity, and I can show you what that means by viewing the certificate. Let's view it. Here is the certificate that's associated with AskMisterWizard.com, and it belongs to powweb.com. As it happens, powweb.com is a web publishing site, and MrWizard.com uses them to publish our site. So it's legitimate that powweb would own this site. And a person who knows that, like me, could add an exception and just say, okay, I know that's okay, that's what we should do. If you know me, or call me on the telephone and are persuaded of what I have to say about this, then you could connect to me with a secure connection too. The same with other people. But you should not do this if you don't have some kind of outside confirmation about who owns a particular certificate. Because if I was a spammer or an attacker, and came at you from the wrong site, and you decided to add an exception, it means, okay, I trust you, and that should not be done. So, in summary, here's the certificate that has been issued to powweb.com, and they've got their certificate from rapidssl.ca, their certificate authority, and asked GeoTrust to sign it. So, powweb has a legitimate certificate that they obtained from rapidssl.ca and got signed by GeoTrust Global CA, a certificate authority, but it doesn't belong to AskMisterWizard.com, so a person who goes through this process for AskMisterWizard.com sees these warnings and probably should not make an exception for them unless they know me or have talked to me and are persuaded that I do legitimately get my business from powweb.com. There's really no need to do that for AskMisterWizard.com because our information is public anyway. We can just go to the unsecure connection. You can see everything you want. But that is the meaning of the S in HTTPS and the padlock that you'll see in most web browsers. Isn't that interesting? As it turns out, it's actually much easier to encrypt traffic than to know who's getting it. Just like in the days of the military, when a general encrypts a message through a courier to send to an admiral, he can encrypt the message himself and the admiral can decrypt it. But there's always the possibility that the enemy might intercept it. That's the harder problem. It's the same today.